Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Anything with Alvin. Today we're going to be making a lot of ways to do scrambled eggs. Now scrambled eggs are one of the simplest dishes I think to ever exist and to be beloved amongst most people in the world. But there's so many ways to do it. A lot of people swear by their own tried and true methods, whether it's adding things like milk or water to make it fluffy, whether there's high heat or slow heat in the pan, whether you're a Michelin star chef and like using a lot of butter on a cold pan. I thought it'd be a fun time to kind of take a look at as many methods as we could compile, compare them to a control test, and really just break down what actually makes a difference and what is worth doing while making all of these. And it'll be a fun time to explore the magic of eggs. Simple, yet probably very complex is what I'm going to guess. So let's get started. A fun side quest we're going to do is that every egg we crack, we're going to crack it against one of its brethren, and we will see how long the king can stay its court before its head gets shattered by a new up-and-coming rival. Should be a fun way to kind of see who comes out the winner. Alright, let's break down our standard scrambled egg, our control group. So we're going to use 3 eggs, and to season, I'm going to add in about half a teaspoon of salt. I'm not going to let the salt sit in there for extra time. I'm only going to let it sit in there for the time it takes to whisk into the eggs. Then we're going to take 1 tablespoon of butter, unsalted, cook that in a pan until it is melted and slightly about to bubble. For the pan flame, I'm keeping that on a medium heat. And once the bubbles are starting, I'm going to pour in those eggs, kind of move them around, not too much, not too little, just enough to form medium-sized curds. And I pull these eggs when they're just about to look almost fully cooked because the residual heat is going to cook the rest of the eggs. These are the standard, I would say, scrambled eggs. Medium curds, cooked curds, but there's still some of it that's barely cooked, so you have a little bit of that silky texture. Some ribbons here and there, but not too crazy, pretty standard. Although still very good. I think the worst thing to do with scrambled eggs is to overcook them. So if anything, I would say pull them when they're 80-90% done. And taste-wise, this tastes like scrambled eggs. I don't really know how to describe it much else. I mean, it's solid. So let's see how we can go from here. People say adding milk into your scrambled eggs make it fluffier. Let's do that. Let's do 3 tablespoons of whole milk. Do 3 eggs, some salt, mix it up. Cook that in the pan of barely frothing butter at a medium heat, pulling it when it's 80-90% done. For this one, because I can't really eat too many eggs or else my doctor will get mad at my cholesterol, we're going to take turns taste testing it. Tony took this one and he said that it was definitely creamier in texture. It kind of brought down and countered the egg taste, which might sound weird, but when you're eating scrambled eggs, usually there's a very strong egg taste, but this seemed to kind of dilute that down. Almost that it kind of reduced that flavor, even though everything else was still there. More of a milky, creamier flavor, more mellow, I would say. And I think the biggest takeaway was that it wasn't necessarily fluffier, but it just was softer and had a less eggy taste. I think the reason why people say it might make it fluffier is because of the extra liquid. If you are cooking it on a higher heat, that is going to evaporate and create steam, which might add some air into your eggs, but we are not cooking it necessarily on a super high heat. So maybe we miss some of that fluffiness texture. I think it's more of a softening agent. But moving on, let's try another one. Let's say you don't have milk at home, but let's just add water. Does that make it any different? Probably, but we'll see what it does. So obviously, this is not something I would probably suggest for flavor purposes, but for texture purposes, let's see what it does. Add the water, beat the eggs, season it, cook it in the pan, and pull it. Now, the scrambled eggs with water added to them are definitely a lot more pale in comparison. Not necessarily visually appealing compared to its yellower counterparts. And yeah, no surprise, it's watery and tastes like steamed egg. I honestly would not recommend this unless you really do not like egg flavors and wanted a watered down egg, but then why would you eat eggs in the first place? So it doesn't really compare to the milk in similarity because there is no really fluffiness. It just tastes like if eggs whispered you from the other room while you drank a bottle of water. 2 out of 10. All right, let's move on to the next method. 1 extra yolk. Played a good amount of king of the court. Looks like we've gotten up to 7. Oh wow. Okay, we gotten up to 8. This guy's got a hard forehead. Anyways, we're going to add 1 singular extra yolk. Obviously, there's going to be an extra egg white. You could probably figure out what to do with that. But if you happen to have extra yolks lying around from something else, like pastries, maybe this could be a fun way to use it up and see how it affects the actual scrambled eggs. Gonna mix that together, pour in the butter, medium heat, frothy bubbles, and cook that the way that we usually do it. Now, the results. The texture is definitely a little bit more luxurious. The extra fat from the egg yolk definitely made it more tender, more soft, a little bit creamier, definitely silkier. And flavor-wise, if you enjoy the flavor of, poached eggs, soft-boiled, you like runny yolks and things like that, it definitely boosts that up a bit. So if you do enjoy that kind of flavor, this is the one for you. Definitely adds an egg yolk flavor, enhances it, which is not surprising because that is exactly what we did. Or maybe you just got a couple of egg yolks from something and you don't really know what to do with it, just throw it in your scrambled eggs. It'll probably be great. And the color is a nice rich golden yellow, which if you are like me, I prefer eggs on a more yellow side. It just makes it feel like it's gonna taste better. The next addition definitely seems more fun and more common. We're gonna do heavy cream as an addition. 3 tablespoons of that go into our 3 eggs, same seasoning, same cooking method, same doneness method, pulling it when it's ready. And yes, when you look at this, definitely less curd formation here. I'm pretty sure the fats got in the way of the proteins forming as hard and as dense, so a lot softer in texture for sure. There's definitely a cream flavor here. Less milky and more creamy. I would say that in the egg and milk test, it tasted more distinct, like the milk taste could come out. But in this one, it's more like the eggs were mellowed out, but you didn't know what they were mellowed out by. And it kind of homogenizes better with the egg compared to the milk, because I would probably say heavy cream just tastes better. There's more fat and has of that less milky flavor. So if you don't like milk, but you want your eggs to be slightly softer and you want to also dilute down the eggy taste, I would suggest using heavy cream. Now we're gonna do cream cheese. 3 tablespoons of cubed up softened cream cheese go into our eggs. The cream cheese is not melted though, so when they go into the pan, there are going to be little chunks here and there that we are going to melt with the heat during the cooking process. Now, because there's these little blocks of cream cheese inside as the egg is cooking, it kind of tanks the heat from the eggs, preventing the proteins from forming huge curds as we're stirring as well. And as it melts, I think it kind of absorbs into and coats all those egg proteins as well. So the result is, it's very creamy, super soft, super melty, super smooth, definitely less curd formation, and taste-wise, it is delicious. I would say it's probably one of the things that I was shocked by how good it was. It has a little bit of a tang that milk and heavy cream do not have. The texture is very smooth, the curds are not large at all. You don't even really taste the cream cheese. There's no chunks of anything in there, and it really counters that egginess and butter as well because of the tangy acidity that it has. I've also learned that the acid in a way acts similarly to the salt, in which it lowers the pH of the egg proteins, which means softer curd. Whether that is true, I'm a huge fan of this one. I feel like this one was a new discovery that I've never really heard of and makes complete sense. And I would do this over heavy cream and over just straight up adding butter. Rachel really loves it. Even though it has a luxurious feel, it doesn't taste too rich or too overwhelming because of the acidic component of cream cheese. All right, our next technique is to salt the eggs in the pan rather than in the bowl. So we proceed. 3 eggs, crack them into the bowl, whisk them up, but do not add salt in here just yet. Then I'm gonna heat the butter in the pan, wait until it's slightly frothy, and pour in the eggs. And now I'm gonna add a little sprinkle of salt. I'm gonna stir that around, cook that until it's achieved that same 80 to 90% doneness that I'm looking for, and then take that out and plate. Definitely there are more curds formed in this one. While I was cooking it as well, I noticed that the protein started to come together a little harder, a little quicker. So the end result, more curds, more bounciness to these eggs, even though we pulled them at the same time. So what the salt does, according to food scientist Harold McGee, is that once it dissolves into the eggs, it has positive and negative ions kind of surround the proteins and allow the proteins to come together a lot quicker than they would usually. They're gonna be more tender and they're gonna be held together. Flavor-wise, it's pretty much the same. I mean, maybe the salt isn't as spread out as much, or if you just happen to have flaky salt and want little bursts rather than just having the whole thing taste like salted eggs. All right, next up, let's test adding ricotta. 3 tablespoons of whole milk, whole fat ricotta. Go in, mix it up, cook it in, kind of wait for it to get to the doneness that we want, stir while we're cooking, and the result, very, very, very soft eggs. You don't really taste the ricotta, but it is very moist because I think ricotta holds a lot of extra water content compared to something like cream cheese. It does blend in, and I would say it's a pretty good way to use up any leftover ricotta you don't know what to do with, but it is kind of similar to the addition of milk, that it just is softer, but kind of dilutes the flavor of the eggs, but it doesn't really scream anything special. So I wouldn't say, compared to the cream cheese, that it is worth using good ricotta on this. So I would say only use it if you just kind of really needed to get rid of it. It does go really well with scrambled eggs and you don't really taste it. Next up, Kewpie mayo. Now, Kewpie mayo is basically just mayo with a little bit more sugar and some acidity added, as well as probably some secret flavors. But mayo is made out of eggs and oil, so essentially we're just adding more eggs to our eggs. 2 tablespoons of this go in. Trying to think about it, because of the sugar and the acid, I'm hoping that this creates a similar effect compared to normal mayo. But also I personally like Kewpie mayo because I think the sugar is quite nice. The result? Definitely less curd formation, definitely smoother in texture, and because we're essentially adding more egg, it enhances the egg flavor instead of trying to counter or dilute it down with cream and milk. And because the tiny bit of acid in it, the tanginess, it does seem to meld in really well without making it overpowering. And it does not taste like Kewpie mayo or mayo whatsoever. So if you do like eggs and you like the aroma of eggs, I would definitely consider adding in Kewpie mayo or probably just regular mayo. And it'll boost that without making it taste like mayonnaise eggs, which sounds way less appetizing than what we just made. All right, next up, we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of cottage cheese to our scrambled eggs. Mix that in, throw it in the pan, cook it until it's done. And definitely as I was plating it up and looking at the texture of the final dish, it is a lot wetter. There's a lot of water in cottage cheese compared to something like ricotta. There's also a lot less fat. So there's definitely a lot of protein and water that is being given to the scrambled eggs. There's a lot more salt in here. And because of cottage cheese does have a pretty distinct flavor, it does actually make the eggs taste cheesy in a way that not necessarily is like the best kind of cheese, but more like you added maybe some fat-free or, cheese shreds that had a little bit too much cornstarch in the back of your fridge that you haven't touched for about a couple months, but it does give it a saltier, cheesier flavors. Probably less guilt because this is a lot of protein in here. Tony said it's almost like you added melted string cheese into your eggs, which is probably something I've done as a kid. All right, next up, ranch. We're gonna add 2 tablespoons of ranch dressing into the eggs. And as you're mixing it, thinking about it, ranch is, fat, acid, some seasonings. Let's see if it kind of seasons the eggs in a way that makes it interesting. And hot ranch isn't necessarily something that's very common, so when you cook it, you can definitely smell it. It's not a bad smell, it just smells like seasonings that go into ranch, and it doesn't really affect the texture of when we cooked it. It just kind of adds a slight interesting, there's something, they season these eggs. A little bit more salt, a little bit more acid, and it's almost like a palate awakener. If you got tired of scrambled eggs and you ate this, you'd be like, oh, I could probably eat some more. But it wouldn't be super noticeable unless you told someone you added ranch. Again, if you got a half bottle of ranch left up or a couple tablespoons that you just don't want to throw in a raw salad, I'm pretty sure they can go really well. Just throw them into your eggs. Okay, the next one is quite an interesting one. This is a cornstarch slurry, commonly used to thicken sauces in Asian style cooking or stir fries. You got a tablespoon of water and a tablespoon of cornstarch that we are going to mix together. Because people on the internet said that this can kind of tenderize and soften the eggs. We will see. I'm not really super confident about this, but let's give it a shot. I'm gonna mix that in and cook it. And as it was cooking and as it came out, I wasn't the most excited. It was pretty gluey. It was very homogeneous. There weren't that many huge curds or anything compared to regular scrambled egg. It almost tastes like fake egg in a way, like hotel pan egg that is soft, but still tastes like it came out of a bag, or if you had powdered eggs. My guess is because the cornstarch slurry, as the egg is cooking, kind of thickens and absorbs any liquid that is coming out of those egg proteins. So you don't really get like these nice contrasting pockets of like curds and really runny egg. You kind of just get a gluier, softer, but weirdly homogeneous texture. I personally wouldn't recommend this technique if you wanted to really make tender eggs. I'm pretty sure there's many other ways to do that. But if you happen to miss and have some nostalgia for those hotel pan eggs that are still well cooked but have that distinct flavor, I think this is one way to do it. All right, our next one, we're gonna now go into techniques and temperatures versus additions. The first one is going to be a bain-marie. We're gonna put a steel mixing bowl over a pot of simmering water, and we're gonna pour in our 3 eggs, our butter, and our salt into the bowl. The bowl is not super hot to start, so we're just gonna cook this slowly over the water and see how it goes. So this definitely took a lot longer to cook, and you have to stir the whole time. I accidentally looked at my phone for a good 10 seconds too long, and it did actually firm up on the sides of the pan where the heat is the most concentrated, so I did slightly overcook this. But because this is cooked in a slower heat over a longer period of time, I feel like the curds that form have less air trapped in them. In that case, it's definitely denser. I'm not even trying to count the fact that I slightly overcooked these, but when you bite into these compared to a regular curd, there's less air, so it feels a lot more dense. I know they're supposed to be a lot softer in curds and have them smaller, which I think is true, but I think that just creates a denser texture. But honestly, with the setup and with the way that it takes like 3 times as long to cook, I wouldn't really personally do it because there's just too many dishes and you gotta wait for the water to boil as well, which could take 7 hours. Okay, the next one we are testing with cooking on very high heat. In this case, we're pouring the eggs into a pan with the butter, but instead of it frothing barely, it's gonna be almost on the point of smoking. And once the eggs go in, we have to cook it really quick. We have to use a lot of movement to move the curds around so they don't overcook, so that the curds form really fast. And because we're doing that and the curds are cooking on a flat surface in more of like layers and moving it around, 1, it comes out a lot quicker than using a normal medium heat, and 2, you have larger, wider ribbons and curtains. There's more folds in these eggs when they're done, and there's more of a contrast because there's more of that runny egg that is slowly being finished cooking by the heat of those curtains and folds. And I would say if you're someone that really likes that high contrast of like a firm outside and a runny inside, this is probably your style of egg. And the best part, it's very quick, but I feel like there's a really high room for failure if you accidentally leave it even 2 seconds too long. So this all comes down to how much you like your egg cooked. And because the heat was a lot higher, the parts that cooked on the hot parts of the pan definitely had more fragrance of the egg brought out. It was a lot more aromatic. Almost smells like the eggs that you would get in fried rice, which makes sense. All right, our next technique is going to be taken from Kenji, where he says that he likes to let the salt in the eggs soak for 10 minutes before cooking them. So we're going to beat our 3 eggs, add our salt in, and instead of throwing that immediately into the pan to start cooking, we're going to wait 10 minutes to see what happens. Here's what they look like 10 minutes later. Now the color definitely changed a little bit, but I think the idea is to really give time for the salt to dissolve and to coat the egg proteins as much as they can to kind of create that tenderizing effect that we talked about earlier. When we're cooking it, I noticed that the color of the eggs was slightly paler, maybe because the salt pulled a little bit of water out of the proteins in the eggs. And when we're cooking it, it definitely feels softer and wetter in texture, almost like you added a liquid like milk or water, but without adding liquid, if that makes any sense. I think the texture, as expected, was a lot more tender, a lot more softer, a lot more creamier in feel without the taste of adding cream. So does adding salt and letting it sit really have a significant effect on your eggs? I think 100% yes. And honestly, if you can spare 10 minutes, I think this drastically improves your texture of the eggs. If you do like a softer scrambled egg, because it's almost a cheat of adding the butteriness and creaminess of those 2 things without having the calories or necessarily the extra flavors of those, which might not be what you want if you just want your eggs simple. So this was a really cool thing that we got to try. The next one, we're gonna crack the eggs directly into the pan and scramble them there. This definitely saves you a bowl, but let's see if it's worth it. So when you crack the eggs directly into the pan, the whites start to cook and set right away. And once you finish cracking all 3 and add your salt, the whites have already started to set, which is I think the intention here. And once you marbleize it up by poking it and mixing it around, things are cooking at different temperatures, different sizes, different parts of the pan, which I think is kind of creating the most amalgamation of textures, temperatures, and donenesses. Like very, very, very messy art if you just wanted to do that on purpose. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just really, really, really looks like mixed up eggs. If you just really want to get some eggs down and, don't mind the appearance of it, and you're probably just eating this at home by yourself, and you don't really care about dirtying another bowl just to make scrambled eggs, it totally works fine. From a visual standpoint, it's very different in terms of how many different kinds of colors and textures that it has. And this is also an opportunity to have your yolk runnier if you wanted a runny yolk in your scrambled eggs without having it be all cooked the same. So yes, this is a fun little quick little fix, but does it really taste like scrambled eggs? Not really. Again, it kind of tastes like you threw multiple sunny sides up in a bowl, chopped it up, and ate it, which also sounds quite delicious. All right, the next one, we're gonna be using oil instead of butter. So we're gonna be using a tablespoon of neutral oil, heating that up at medium heat, and then cooking the eggs pretty normally in that one. Now this one, it's definitely shinier because of the oil, although it's not my favorite method because I just think butter and eggs are one of the biggest matches made in heaven. Oil and eggs, you can kind of taste that the eggs were cooked in oil. It doesn't really meld as much in terms of flavor, and the oil flavor is quite strong. So if you don't have butter at home and still want to make scrambled eggs and you don't like the flavor of oil, I probably wouldn't do that because it still stands out as pretty distinct. You could probably just get away with non-stick pan and just going straight in with the scrambled eggs. All right, the next one, we're gonna start our eggs in a cold pan with cold butter. Everything is cold, nothing is warm, and you kind of slowly bring up the heat and slowly cook your eggs, stirring the whole time until your eggs are at the texture that you desire. It's very homogeneous though, and because you don't have any large curds because you were mixing the whole time, and everything is very tender, very soft, almost with a sticky texture because it was brought up with slow heat. There was no shock to the protein with a high heat from the pan or with hot fat. So everything is more evenly cooked. It doesn't really have curds. It's just more like barely cooked eggs that are sticking together. And if you maybe just got braces or got your wisdom teeth pulled out and you don't really want anything firm, this is one way to get those eggs down. Although you probably just drink the eggs. That's a method we're not testing today. Our next technique will be using the microwave. If you're in college or somewhere where you just don't happen to have another heat source like a hotel, but you only got a microwave and somehow you have eggs and you want a quick fix, let's try it out. Mix it in, throw the butter in there, throw the salt in there, throw it in the microwave. And every microwave power setting is different, which is why for this one, we'll be doing it by eye. I'm going to pull it where there's almost a slight 20% puddle of uncooked egg in the middle, because my guess is that everything else will be firmly cooked and we're gonna use the residual heat. So once that's out, then take the eggs out and give it a good mix so that the heat from the bowl as well as the other parts of the egg can heat up and slowly cook the uncooked part of the egg. Now, this one, no surprise, is full of curds because we did not move it at all while it was cooking. And it is very spongy looking and with very, very large, tight curds. No ribbons, no curtains, no beautiful looking textures that we usually associate with scrambled egg because they just got cooked and chunky and sat in a bowl. And Nico said, it was pretty funny, he said that if people say they don't like eggs, it's because they taste like this, which I think means that the eggs were cooked, but without any of the good flavors of a hot pan and some butter. And because everything is cooked in a tight curd without any sort of interesting textures, it kind of ends up blocky and not rubbery, just very eggy in your mouth, very bouncy and not a good way. All right, our next one, very simple, cheese eggs. We're gonna throw shredded cheese directly into our scrambled eggs and let the cheese cook in the pan along with the eggs as the pan heats up. Now this one, because again, similar to the cream cheese or the butter, the cheese acts as a heat shield for the eggs, taking a lot of that heat and melting into the eggs as the eggs start to cook. It's a lot softer, it's very gooey, it's very sticky because the cheese melts right into the eggs and because the fat probably prevents the large curds from forming. And the taste, it surprisingly, it tastes like cheesy eggs. The recipe is in the title. I think the biggest part of that is beyond the flavor, it does help act as an egg softener, which seems to be a very common trend from these techniques we've been trying. So it's one way to kind of almost ensure that you don't overcook or get too large of a chunk, because if you keep mixing all the cheese in there, the cheese is going to melt into the eggs and the fat prevents the curds from forming too firm. Okay, next up, bacon eggs. Not necessarily bacon and eggs, bacon eggs. Chop up some bacon, throw it into the pan, cook that until crispy, until all the grease has been released, and drain out most of it. And instead of using butter, we're going to cook it directly in the leftover remaining bacon grease. The eggs are going to go directly into the pan with the bacon, so we do not take the bacon out and separate them. They're going to cook together. Now, because the pan is already so hot from cooking all the bacon, I'm just going to turn off the heat the moment the eggs touch the pan and move them around until they're cooked. Clearly the bacon flavor is going to be strong, but the texture is softer overall because one, it's required us to turn off the heat when we we put in the eggs, and 2, having the bacon in there as we moved it around kind of breaks up any large curd formation from happening. Tony said that after eating this one, the texture, aside from the bacon, reminded him of the cold pan technique, because we technically did not have heat to cook the eggs the whole way through. It is more of a slower descent or ascent. Alright, the next one people might be very familiar with, Gordon Ramsay's scrambled eggs. He made this style very popular and has done it numerous times in many videos, but let's just do this for comparison as well. Let's break down his technique. So, he has eggs, a large saucepan, bread, sourdough or some sort of loaf, chives, and creme fraiche. Definitely more ingredients than your typical standard scrambled eggs. 3 eggs go directly into the pan, which is off of the heat, as well as 2 tablespoons of butter. These are going to be whisked together until the eggs have been broken up, and then they're going to go on to the heat at a medium-high heat. Now, he does a technique where he cooks it for a few seconds and takes it off the heat, puts it back on and back off. My understanding is it allows enough heat to get into the actual pan itself to continue cooking the eggs slowly, even though the pan is off the heat, which does make sense if you have a high flame. But I think this method not only just is interesting to look at, but also might result from being born in a kitchen where maybe the flames have to be on all the time. Maybe it's a stovetop that you cannot control the flame, because a lot of the old French kitchen stovetops didn't have flames on the surface, they were underneath. So you just had a nice hot zone where if you wanted to cook eggs, couldn't really turn on the heat instantly. You had to take the saucepan off the heat to continue cooking it, because I don't know if this is going to be different than cooking it just the whole time on a lower heat, but I do think this maybe helps save some time in a busy kitchen. Now, 10 to 15 seconds at a time, whisking the whole time, because we do not want large curds to form. That's kind of his way of doing this. To cool the eggs, to prevent it from overcooking, he adds in the spoonful of creme fraiche. That cools it down, prevents the eggs from cooking. Adds salt, which he adds salt afterwards, not before, which maybe could be a bit more tender if you salted the eggs before. And then it's basically very soft, almost liquid-like. We're gonna pour this egg mixture right on top of our toast, and finally top that with some chives that we have finely chopped. Eggs and chives are one of the most beautiful combinations I've ever seen. The yellow and the green really stand out on top of a piece of bread, but I wouldn't necessarily say this is scrambled eggs. This is more like really soft butter eggs on toast, which is also delicious. It's more of like an eggs spread where the eggs are a sauce and a garnish. It's very French style, no large curds at all, just a very delicious liquid-like sauce that really goes well when you eat it with bread. I think if you didn't have the bread, it would be a little hard to eat and a little too much, too indulgent almost, as there's just so much butter and eggs in here. But it is, as Rachel says, sumptuous. All right, the next recipe, why not compare it to the recipe given by his mentor, Pierre White. This recipe was taken by his BBC cooking series, which I personally do love because it's just him cooking at home and it's pretty fun. His version incorporates smoked salmon, as well as Gordon's version that includes bread and chives. First, we're going to chop up our smoked salmon into thin little tiny strips, as well as our chives. His technique is similar, but slightly different. A pat of butter goes into the pan, this is off the heat, as well as our 3 eggs. Now, he also does not salt it instantly, but he puts it on a low heat, very low heat, mixing the eggs and cooking it the whole time. He says that the heat should be low enough that you should be able to touch the side of the top of the pan without instantly burning yourself. To be fair, this is a little subjective and possibly dangerous because he has very trained hands and may have a different sense of what hurtful and heat tolerance is, but I understand his point. The point is that the heat should be very low. But the result of this one is that the texture is almost fully at your control because you're the one standing over it and whisking it the whole time. You decide exactly when you want to pull it off, and usually residual heat is not going to be an issue because low heat is going to be what's cooking your eggs the whole time. The only downside is it does take quite a while, but sometimes it's not about the end result, it's about the journey. So once the eggs are cooked to a similar consistency of that nice egg texture that almost walks over the plate, we're going to add our salt and a splash of heavy cream into our eggs, as well as a little bit of pepper. This is different than Gordon's creme fraiche, where you're just using heavy cream directly. Now we're going to take our toasted bread this time, and we're going to scrape a little bit of butter onto it because buttered toast is delicious. And you know what's more delicious than buttered toast? Buttered toast with a lot of eggs and butter and cream right on top of it. It's very similar in texture. It's a very almost thickened sauce, and it is looking quite delicious. But hey, we're not done yet. There's more. Just in case that wasn't enough cholesterol, we're going to add an entire poached egg right on the top. I think Marco really seems to like eggs. Then we're gonna top that with our smoked salmon, chives, and just to garnish, a little bit of melted butter because, you know, we gotta finish it with some sauce. You can add melted butter, or you can add his favorite condiment, olive oil. It's your choice. This is the final dish, very indulgent, clearly very luxurious, both in the amount of ingredients and the ones that he has chosen. And might make you take a nap for the next couple of years, but who cares? That's your choice. Now, as the law states, we must pop the yolk. Here it is. The dish looks beautiful, and because I'm already very full at this point, Rachel is going to eat this one. She says that she likes Marco's method more because of the slower heat. The eggs become more of this custard-like texture rather than, these soft and tiny curds in an emulsification of butter and creme fraiche. She also says that the creme fraiche almost counters the egginess too hard, which is, I think, personal preference, and she likes the heavy cream addition instead. And I think this is definitely one of those things where it is really your preference, right? It is creme fraiche or heavy cream, high heat, low heat, whole time, chives, smoked salmon, putting butter on your toast, you got an extra egg. Again, it's your choice. All right, now that we've done a lot of techniques, how about we take a look at some more non-traditional ways to use up scrambled eggs, taking inspiration from recipes found in other parts of the world. First up, migas. This recipe was taken from muydelish.com. Thank you for that. This we're going to start with taking a few old corn tortillas that might have dried out or might not be as fresh as they used to be. We're going to cut these into wedges, and then we're going to shallow fry them in a pan with oil until they're brown and crispy. To be fully honest, I didn't measure the temperature of the oil. I just kind of thought it was hot, threw the chips in, waited until they looked brown and crispy and done, and took them out. Drained them on a paper towel and salted while they were still warm. Now, for our ingredients, I'm going to cut up a few jalapenos, some onions, and tomatoes into a small dice. And in a little bit of that leftover frying oil that we cooked the tortilla chips in, I'm going to put in our vegetables. Saute that up, mix it around until it is just starting to brown on the onions, and then I'm going to throw all of our chips back in. And this is the fun part. In goes directly our 3 scrambled eggs that we have whisked with some salt in a bowl, and then I'm letting this just sit there. I'm not moving this for probably 30 seconds because I don't want to interrupt all these beautiful textures that are happening by not necessarily making everything homogeneous. The eggs are going to set, they're going to absorb a little bit, they're going to cook more on one side than the other, and then we're going to mix it up. So that way, and the final result is you don't have a mashed up clump of just soggy chips, you have more textural components. Some are whole chips, some are half chips, some have absorbed eggs, some have a lot of vegetables, some don't have vegetables at all. And I think that's a lot more interesting than if we immediately mix it with the eggs vigorously until it was all one thing. We're gonna pour this onto a plate. And I think the coolest part is that how the tortilla chips absorb the moisture from both the vegetables as the eggs. And it's not dry, it's not way too wet either. It's just this perfect medium where there's enough textural contrast, but not too crispy to where you might hurt your roof of your mouth. This gets plated up, a little bit of salt and pepper to garnish, hot sauce if you want. And this is, I guess, our little quick homemade version of migas. I'm sure there's many ways to do this at home, many ways that people have done for many years. And I think it's a really cool way to use up scrambled eggs and old tortillas if you have them lying around. Everyone liked this one. All right, taking inspiration from videos I've seen online as well as places in Japan and Korea, we're gonna do the tornado egg. Now this one is a really fun one. This visually stunning if you can pull it off, and it comes together in the matter of seconds and it requires a lot of finesse. 3 eggs, scramble that, salt them, no streaks, and then I'm going to prepare a non-stick pan with oil, not butter, oil, and have this on a high heat. Then the moment the oil is getting hot, I'm gonna pour the eggs in, and immediately once the edges of the egg start to bubble up and set, I'm going to use chopsticks and pull them in towards the center to kind of create a little bit of a fold, almost like a bow tie pasta. And while the uncooked egg fills in the gaps from pulling those in, I'm going to twirl the pan by the handle while holding the egg in the middle with the chopsticks, creating a vortex in one direction. I'm going to essentially keep doing this until the egg hopefully slips away from the pan and allows me to kind of twirl it all the way around and create what is known as the tornado egg. Now this is a little bit harder than it looks. You have to kind of know the egg and know your pan to know when to twist it and when to pull it. You pull it too early, you're gonna break it. You pull it too late, you're also gonna break it. And you also have to take this off the heat because there's a lot of high heat in the pan that is going to residually cook the eggs. And if it cooks too much, you won't be able to place it onto your mound of rice. So once this is done, I would give this attempt a 7 out of 10. Probably way more to go if I wanted to make it better. But this is going to go right onto a circular mold of bowl of rice that we've just inverted to create this shape. And voila, this is a little bit of that tornado vortex looking action. Not bad for a couple of first attempts. Definitely failed a few off camera, then we saved those leftovers, so don't worry, they didn't waste any eggs. And now, a commonly served sauce with this is a demi-glace sauce, or kind of a meat gravy or a sauce that every kind of house has their specialty in those countries. But my version of this is very quick. There's these things called hayashi cubes. They're almost like those curry stock cubes, but instead of curry, they have their own proprietary blend of essentially a brown sauce. We're just mixing that with hot water until it has dissolved and thickened. And this, I can say, in a pinch, act as a quick demi-glace solution. It does have a good amount of flavor, and honestly, I eat it a lot. It's great. We pour that around the tornado, almost like a moat, and finely chopped chives to garnish to make that look really pretty. Yeah, this is our quick version of a tornado omelet. Many ways to make this probably more fancy with more ingredients and amping up the rice and the gravy, but I would say this is very solid. It's not necessarily scrambled eggs, but it is one way to eat your eggs in a more interesting fashion if you're getting tired of the old scrambled egg. It's really good with the rice, really good with the gravy, everything goes together well, and it is very reliable. Alright, similarly, we're going to make omurice, made famous by Kichi Omurice in Kyoto, which I've actually had the pleasure of going and visiting and eating, and he is a great man. So, in a mold that we got online a long time ago for a previous video, I have in here some ketchup soy sauce fried rice. The recipe is in the title. It's kind of a default kind of rice that goes in this dish, and we're going to invert that to have this almost half football looking shape, because that is where the egg is going to lie down. We're going to beat our eggs really vigorously until there are no streaks, with salt, because that's very important. And then into an extremely high heat nonstick pan with oil, I'm going to pour in our eggs. Now this is where things get very intense. There's a lot of videos of a lot of people trying to attempt this, and the reason why Kichi made it famous is because he does this so expertly and is very, very beautiful and hard to, I guess, imitate. I'm whisking and shaking the pan intensely the moment the eggs go in, because what I'm doing is I'm trying to prevent any huge chunks of curds from forming. I'm trying to cook the egg by creating holes with the chopsticks. And as I'm shaking the pan, the egg kind of splashes on the edges of the pan, and I'm going to need to bring those edges in. I don't want any of this overcooking. I'm essentially trying to cook as much surface area of the egg as quickly as possible over this high heat. So that means I need to move it a lot and break up any chunks that could be possibly overcooking. And then, in the matter of a few seconds, the pan is tilted, and I'm slowly sweeping one edge of that omelet to roll over the other, creating a football shape. And now the tricky part is, if you overcook this, the thickness of the egg will break. So this needs to be done when essentially the bottom circle of the pan is barely cooked into the egg shape. This is hard to explain with words, but essentially I'm trying to tuck this in, like a football shape, and then using the bottom of your fist as a obstacle, I'm going to tap the pan against my fist to impact it, creating a little bit of a jump that ideally turns the omelet into a form where it can seal itself. Once it's kind of gone away around and it's ready to flip with the seam side facing up, I'm going to slowly and gently slide this onto our football shape of rice. If done correctly, it should lay nicely on top with a nice curved oblong smooth texture. No brown spots because the egg was cooked instantly without having a chance to cook hard. And then, with a thin knife, I'm going to slice straight down the belly of the omelet in a swift manner. And technically it should fall open and show off its beautiful custardy insides, but I'm not as good as that guy, so it needs a little bit of work. Not the most visually perfect omurice, again, probably a 6 or a 7 out of 10, but I'm going to let it slide because otherwise I'm going to waste so many eggs trying to perfect this. This is more like the fact that an omelet is soft curds held by a thin layer of cooked egg over rice with some demi-glace. It is delicious. Taste-wise, it's very similar to the tornado egg, but instead of a little thin sheet, you get these softer curds. And because of the seasoned rice, it's definitely a little bit more fun. Definitely a fun experiment if you're just really bored and want to figure out how to do it, but be warned, you're gonna go through at least probably a couple dozen eggs before you really nail it, unless you're a prodigy. Okay, next up, I'm gonna try making a Thai-style crispy omelet called kai jiao. Okay, first we're gonna make a dipping sauce. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of fish sauce, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of white vinegar, and 1 tablespoon of water in a small bowl. Slice and add 1 thinly sliced bird's eye chili. Mix that together just until the sugar has dissolved. This is gonna be a nice sweet, spicy, acidic sauce that'll flavor the omelet really well. Now I'm gonna slice up 4 scallions. I'm gonna put 2 of those scallions into a bowl and add in our eggs and a tablespoon of fish sauce, and that's gonna get mixed in and seasoned with a little bit of white pepper. Now, our eggs and our dipping sauce are ready. It's time to cook this thing. So for this omelet, I'm going to use a wok. I'm going to turn up the heat to its highest because often I've seen this, it's done in a wok over a very high heat. Now for the oil, it's not the healthiest dish in the world, but this is almost shallow fried in the wok. So a good healthy amount of oil needs to be very hot, smoking hot. And then once it is ready, I'm going to pour all that egg mixture directly in, and I'm not going to touch it for a while. It's going to puff up, it's going to brown, it is going to quote unquote overcook. But the whole point is I want to get that beautiful smoky, eggy, golden brown aroma in this. This is not your soft scrambled French style egg. This is a Thai omelet. Once it is puffed up and there are no wet spots, I'm going to flip it and let it cook on the other side. Because this is in a really high heat, it's going to puff up a lot. You're going to cook very quickly. So once it's ready, I'm going to drain it on a paper towel to soak up any of the excess oil that we can. And then this is going to go directly on top of a little bit of white rice. And then to finish, the rest of the 2 scallions that we didn't use from before, a little bit of sriracha is going to be served with our dipping sauce. And to eat this, break the omelet, get a spoonful of that crispy golden brown egg, season with scallions, eat it with the rice, some fish sauce, and some sriracha, and just have a good time. And the best part is, Rachel said she was so full from eating everything else we made today, but she's going to continue eating this. I think that's how much she really liked it. It's crispy, it's eggy, it's smoky, it's aromatic, it has sour taste, it has sweetness, it's delicious, and it has rice. It's kind of one of those things where it checks every single box if you are into every single box. Next, we're gonna do a recipe that's very near and dear to me. So this is Chinese tomato egg. So this is actually a pretty common dish if you grew up in China or the States or had Chinese parents or Asian parents that kind of made this for you. It's a home style dish. It's something that isn't fussy at all. It's not supposed to be expensive. It's not supposed to be something that you order at a restaurant. It's just something that you or your mom makes or your dad makes because you want something to eat and it's cheap, and somehow it tastes way better than the sum of its parts. I hate tomatoes. I despise raw tomatoes, but I love this dish. It's really interesting. And even though this dish is simple and the recipe in the name only has 2 things, it's actually a little bit more nuanced than one might think. Personally, I like to use 2 eggs for every tomato. I know it's a little bit of overkill some places, and some people like to use 1-to-1, but I've always just wanted more eggs in my tomato egg. So this is my way of kind of overloading it. Got 4 tomatoes, got 8 eggs, and I chopped the tomato pretty roughly into large chunks. Can't have them too small. And then we're gonna beat our eggs, whisk in some salt, and cook that in a wok, a little bit of oil, not too much, and wait for these big curds. I'm almost unintentionally not moving it and waiting for those ribbons and curtains to form. I really want these big curds. I don't want to have it broken up in small because I want it to be able to be noticed in the final dish. That's how I like it. And then once the egg has been taken out of the wok, that's important, and kind of sitting on the side, we're going to put in our tomatoes. I'm going to put in some salt, sugar, and importantly, MSG. I think the sugar and the MSG really enhance the taste of this dish without making it noticeable. Like, you wouldn't really notice why it tastes this good, but I feel like those 2 things are a big part of its reason, especially since tomatoes have natural MSG. And as the tomatoes are cooking, they're going to release their water, so it almost starts simmering in a way. But what I like to do is I like to make sure that you press down onto the tomatoes with a wooden spoon or something similar to kind of break its flesh and to break its skin, so that way it doesn't look like there's chunks of tomatoes. It looks like there's almost just crushed tomatoes in a way. I think the skin separating and the flesh kind of melding into its own little saucy, almost like potato-like texture is pretty important because it kind of creates a sauce rather than being a chunk of tomato next to the egg. It's also probably why I like it, because I don't like biting into whole chunks of tomatoes. I want everything to kind of meld together. So once the tomatoes have all been crushed and it's starting to simmer and there's no large chunks left, then I like to add in the eggs. I think the eggs essentially act as a sponge in this dish, almost like how tofu and mapo tofu is done. The eggs absorb the tomatoes and their natural juices, the sauces, and the seasonings from everything that we put in there. And I think something magical happens here. You only have these 2 ingredients, but somehow the dish doesn't taste like either of them. It tastes like something completely new, almost like that scene in Ratatouille. And this is, I guess, my version of tomato egg, with a lot more eggs than you usually find, usually a lot more tomato because it's cheaper that way, but this is how I like it at home. And of course, this is the dish, as they say in China, it goes really well with rice. Like, the phrase that we use is 下饭, literally means to down your rice. And this tastes way better with rice. If you've never had it before, it's a little hard to describe. It's very mellow though. It's not strong. It's not eggy. It's not even tomatoey. It does not taste like marinara. It almost just tastes like a nice comforting dish. And I think that's the whole point of this thing is that it doesn't necessarily taste like anything particular, but it makes you feel comforted. Alright, our next recipe, we're going to be looking towards Japan for some inspiration. This is Soboro Don. This recipe is from Just One Cookbook. Got a pound of ground chicken here. I'm gonna mix in a tablespoon of sake, a tablespoon of mirin, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 3 tablespoons of soy sauce. Then I'm gonna grate 1 tablespoon of ginger into that. Just gonna knead that in until everything is mixed together. 3 eggs, crack them into the bowl, add in a tablespoon of sugar and salt, whisk them up. Now, I'm gonna have 2 pots here. One, I'm gonna crack the eggs into directly, off the heat, and slowly cook that on a low-medium heat and use chopsticks. This is to prevent any air from forming. When you use chopsticks, you're breaking it up into tiny firm curds that you almost end up with a texture that looks like gravel, which I think is the point. It's supposed to be dense, but it's supposed to be small. So that way the egg curds are very tiny, but very vibrant because there's no air to dilute their color. Now the ground chicken kind of follows a similar process in a pan. I think you could probably get this on a higher heat because there's a lot of water that's going to be coming out. But again, cooking this like you would cook ground beef until it is fully cooked all the way through and in tiny little chunks, just like the egg. The goal for this is to have everything at a very similar size level. Once both are cooked, it's very simple. Plate this up. Got a bowl of rice, and on top we're going to do 1/3 of the surface area with the chicken mixture, 1/3 with our eggs, and 1/3 with a green element. In this case, peas. I've seen people use different little string beans or other green vegetables. I think this is kind of where it's a little bit of your choice. Visually, it's beautiful. These nice compartments make it kind of interesting, and when you dig into it, you can kind of go back and forth or mix it up. If you're a psycho, that's probably illegal because I've never seen anyone do that. Like I said, the way you eat your Chipotle bowl says a lot about you. And because of the extra sugar added into the eggs, I think this definitely has a little bit different of a flavor and tastes more akin to Japanese cuisine than necessarily scrambled eggs over rice. All right, one of our final few recipes is Korean style eggs. They call this Korean style eggs for an urgent morning. Now, imagine this. You're rushing in the morning, you just got these ingredients lying around in your pantry and your fridge, but you need something to get your day started. So, what do? You take out your pan, you put it on the heat, you just crank the heat out, whatever, it's probably really high. You throw in a couple things of sesame oil from your pantry. And then you crack your eggs directly into the pan. But you want to be a little bit careful with your food. You're still conscious, you're gourmet. So what do? You mix up the whites only with the chopsticks. You do not touch the yolks. You only mix up the whites so that they cook evenly along the edges of the pan and kind of sizzle with the sesame oil. The heat's flaring the whole time. You get these little crispy bits towards the edge. Once all the whites have been spread out and are fully cooked, then you take the soy sauce and you throw it in on the edges of the pan towards the center. That way they sizzle and start to evaporate a lot more quickly. And then finally, you turn off the heat, you break the yolks, and you hurriedly mix everything together, but very quickly and not a lot of time. So that way you get this marbleized, soy sauce stained, sesame oil coated, crunchy, but soft eggs that have so many different textures and flavors. And then you put that over a bowl of rice, and you throw some scallions on there, and you take a bite. It's balanced, it's easy, it's delicious, it's simple, it's cheap. I can see why so many people found this very popular. And I can also see why this is called Easy Eggs for a Urgent Morning. Because even though it is titled that way, I'm sure this would also be very well received at night. Or honestly, any time of the day, because of its nature of how hurriedly and how rustic and not consistent and not even everything is, with everything splashed around and kind of just thrown together quickly. It tastes a lot better that way. I think if you took your time and tried to make this, super evenly with the same ingredients, it would be completely different. The imperfections are, I think, the star of the show here. So we've made a lot of eggs through our testing in a lot of different methods and a lot of different ways, and obviously we couldn't finish every single one. So here is the giant bowl of every single scrambled egg variation that we couldn't finish. We combined them all into this one bowl because I definitely would not allow this food go to waste. Instead, I want to see if we can turn this into something more fun. Maybe you do have leftover scrambled eggs and you just don't want to eat cold, reheated scrambled eggs the next day. What can you do? In this case, I thought it'd be fun to make some freezer prep breakfast burritos. First, we're gonna slice up this leftover bacon that we have in just large chunks. Slice up the jalapenos left over from the Migas. We got some onion lying around. I'm gonna chop that up too. Have some half-eaten sausages found in the fridge. Got a whole pack and a half there, so I'm gonna slice that up. And then we're gonna get some gloves on and mix all of these eggs and create a softer mix in a scramble, because these are kind of firmed up at different points. And also, of all the different flavors that are ongoing in the eggs, I want to make it a little bit more homogeneous. So not one person is getting that water egg and one person gets a bunch of ranch in their eggs. We want to kind of even out the playing field a little bit. And we also get to make the texture of the curds a little bit smaller this way. Although we cooked each scrambled egg very well, this is a really nice, soft, smooth texture. Not those overcooked scrambled eggs you can often find in burritos. So, we got 2 pans. I'm gonna cook the meat down. Bacon's gonna crisp up in one pan. Sausage is gonna crisp up in another pan until everything's looking nice and golden brown. I'm gonna drain most of the fat, but not all of it. And after the meat is removed, we're gonna cook scallions that we also found chopped up, and jalapeno in one pan, and onions and peppers in the other, seasoned with some black pepper and white pepper to kind of give that more of the Tex-Mex breakfast burrito fajita style vegetable feel. And dug around in the fridge, have some leftover blocks of cheese for some other shoots, so we're gonna grate that up as well. Don't know what each cheese is, but they're still good. And then we still have that bag of shredded cheese that we're also gonna just combine and throw it all into one big mixture, because that's the fun of making leftovers. Everything gets kind of used together, and you get to use up all those little bits and pieces that you would have probably never touched otherwise. All right, we did it to get some large flour tortillas for this too. So what we're gonna do, lay down a flour tortilla, take a hefty scoop of scrambled eggs. On top of that goes some vegetables, some meat, probably bacon or sausage or both, some American cheese, and as Rachel's request, some hot sauce, and we're gonna wrap that up. Now, we're gonna hand these off to Tony to kind of wrap in saran wrap and wrap up as I continue assembling the next one. Now we made a ton of these, some with more egg, some with less egg. Obviously the amounts that we made were not supposed to be perfectly, in the right ratio, so we were definitely running out of vegetables a little quicker, and then we ran out of meat a lot quicker, then we ended up with just eggs and cheese, but that was okay, because the point was, these are all delicious breakfast burritos, and maybe it's almost to be a surprise which one you're gonna get next. So what did we actually learn today? It was a lot of fun, making all those different kinds of eggs and different techniques and mix-ins and add-ons and temperatures. Personally, I thought the cream cheese was the most impressive in the way that it did so many things to just one ingredient. It added acidity, which was nice because it wasn't just too buttery. It added a smooth texture, it added a creaminess. It didn't completely kill the egg flavor, and in my opinion, it beat out all of the other mix-ins if you just wanted to really take your eggs to make them more enhanced without making it feel like you added a bunch of new stuff into it. If I make scrambled eggs in the future and I had the time, I would definitely salt them 10 minutes before. I really like that technique. Kenji really nailed it on the head, and the science of it is really significant when you do it in the eggs, and it does matter, even letting it sit for an extra 10 minutes. I would add cream cheese in, I would cook it at a standard medium heat, and honestly, I would top them with the chives. It just looks really, really, really pretty, and you get a nice oniony bite from those. That would be kind of my ideal scrambled egg recipe. I would say that the French style with the Bain-marie and Gordon's and Marco's recipes are cool, but to me they're not necessarily the scrambled eggs that we all typically make and know and love, because the ones that we typically make are quick, they're easy, they don't have a lot of ingredients, and it gets the job done. So I think the appeal is more if you are cooking for other people and you want to take eggs to the next level. They provide really, really good recipes to kind of wow and stun and indulge in, which I think are important too. Here are all of the breakfast burritos that we made, and these are great because you can throw them in your freezer, then when you're ready, you take them out, pop them in the microwave or the oven, and you got a burrito. Rachel and Tony took home all of those and are going to eat those for the next few weeks. So I'm happy that this food was not wasted and it went to people who were actually going to eat them in a more exciting form. And based on the ingredients and the ways that we cooked it, everything's probably going to taste pretty good.